Hi there! Today I'm sharing with you the most delicious fermented red cabbage sauerkraut recipe. I turned my kitchen into a test kitchen, made 5 variations, and then fine-tuned them into the single best recipe combination. And of course, it's fermented, so it's loaded with probiotics and is a powerhouse nutritious superfood. Let's get started. I strive to make all my fermenting videos beginner friendly, so if this is your first go at fermenting, I want to set you up for success. Therefore, I'll take you through it step by step. No special equipment is required. Other than the recipe ingredients, all you need is a glass jar and the willingness to try. Here's a quick overview of the ingredients we need for this red cabbage sauerkraut recipe. Red cabbage, fennel bulb and top, fennel seeds, red beet, pear, and natural salt. This cabbage is 2.8 pounds whole, and after we core it, it will be about 2 pounds even. The ingredients for this recipe are based on this size of cabbage. If you don't have a scale, this works out to be around 11 cups of chopped cabbage. Exact measurements are not required. If you have a little more or a little less with any of the ingredients, don't sweat it. It's going to turn out great. Wash or rinse the cabbage however you normally would. Then remove a couple of the outer leaves, save them for later. Cut off the end of the cabbage, quarter it, and then cut out the core. Slice and chop up the cabbage. I find that doing it by hand versus shredding it in a food processor produces a better texture of kraut. Toss it into a large mixing bowl. Repeat until all the cabbage is chopped and in the bowl. I'm using glass, but you can use stainless steel, ceramic, wood, or food-grade plastic. This is just for the preparation part though. For the fermenting element, glass jars or a ceramic crock are best. Next, cut off the core of the fennel bulb and remove the outer shell layers. Use the fresh white part of the bulb and chop it up. We'll need about 3/4 to 1 cup. Add it to the bowl of cabbage. Before we move on to the following ingredients, we're going to add the salt to the cabbage and fennel root to get the salt process started. I'm using this pink Himalayan salt. The standard ratio is 1/2 tablespoon of salt per pound of cabbage. You can use less salt and still get a good ferment. If you haven't heard of low salt krauts, it's a real thing that's more than possible while still producing a safe fermented sauerkraut. I often do a low salt green cabbage and carrot kraut. Maybe you've seen the video. However, with this recipe, we're going to use the standard cabbage to salt measurement. With my 2 pounds of cabbage, I'll be using 1 tablespoon of salt. Sprinkle it over the cabbage mixture and then give it a toss to incorporate it thoroughly throughout. Then set the bowl aside. This method is called dry salting. Instead of a pre-made saltwater brine that's poured over vegetables to be fermented, with dry salting, we sprinkle the salt without added water directly onto the cabbage as we just did. The salt then begins to work on the cabbage by drawing out the water within it. Essentially, the cabbage is making its own brine from its own juice. The salt does need time to work though in pulling out that water, which is why we're setting the bowl aside for about 20 to 30 minutes. Also, let me add this note about salt. Use a natural salt that hasn't been stripped of its minerals, has no added iodine or other ingredients like anti-caking agents and bleaching agents, since they can inhibit the beneficial bacteria we need for the fermentation. Examples of natural salts are sea salts and pink salts like Himalayan or Redmond's. Kosher salt will also work so long as there's no added ingredients. Just read the label and make sure it says only salt. Pretty much the rule of thumb when fermenting is to avoid using table salt since it's been stripped of its minerals, iodized, and has anti-caking and bleaching agents added. Okay, moving on to the next step. Cut up about 1/3 cup of the green fennel top. We're going to add this to a separate bowl from the cabbage at this time. Next, add 2 cups of shredded red beet root. By hand or machine, however you choose to shred it is fine. We'll use 1 whole pear of any size. I'm choosing to peel mine because sometimes the skins don't break down well in the ferment and they're like chewing on a bit of wax paper. But if you want the skins on, leave them on. Cut out the core. I find quartering the pear makes this easy. Then chop it up and toss it in the bowl with the beet. Lastly, grind up 1 teaspoon of fennel seeds. You can use pre-ground if that's what you have available, but if you can, fresh is where it's at. With the store pre-ground spices, they're months to years old, therefore oxidized and most likely irradiated as well. Essentially, there's minimal to no health benefits remaining, just some flavor. With grinding the whole seed fresh, all of those polyphenols and antioxidants are released and bioactive. The flavor is zesty and alive compared to the pre-ground. Let's check to see how the salt is working so far. Yes, it's starting to feel a bit wet and softer, which is exactly what we want. Go ahead and clean up your workstation before moving on to the next step and allow the salt to work on the cabbage just a bit longer. Okay, it's time to massage and pound the cabbage with your fresh, clean hands. This is going to help tenderize the cabbage and draw out the cabbage juice. I like to also use this little wooden pie tart mallet as a pounder. Personally, I'm a fan of its small size, as you'll see why later. Then, as I like to do, switch back and forth from tool to hands, hands to tool. However, the tool isn't required. Working the cabbage can all be done with hand massaging. This will take some time so you can get some good thinking in about that to-do list you have, or put on a good show to help move the time along. Speaking of, I've got some video suggestions for you that you can watch while you work your kraut. Ever wonder what types of probiotics are in fermented sauerkraut? I've got a video that shares the predominant 12 probiotic strains found in a live culture sauerkraut. I've also got a video that explains the 5 different types of fermentation. And if you've ever wondered what the difference between pickling and fermenting is, I've got a video on that as well, comparing the two. Okay, back to the cabbage. You'll know when you're done with this step when the cabbage is feeling limp and wet in your hands. See how wet my hands look? That's from the water being pulled out of the cabbage. If you pull some of this back, you can see the cabbage juice forming at the bottom of the bowl. This is exactly what you want. It's the cabbage made brine. And when your cabbage does this, when you pick it up and squeeze it, you're done massaging and pounding, ready for the next step. Add the other ingredients to the cabbage mixture and give it a toss to incorporate thoroughly. If you have concerns about the beet staining your hands red, as it can do, gloves are an option but not required. You may wonder why we didn't put it all in the same bowl from the start, and that's because the shredded beet and the pear would have been pulverized into a mush had they been pounded and intensely massaged like the cabbage was. The fennel bulb had enough structural integrity to take it. Alrighty, ready to pack that kraut into jars? Let's do it. Wash the jars with hot soapy water. Sterilization isn't needed. Hot soapy water is sufficient. Gloves or no gloves, with your freshly washed hands, start by taking a handful of the mixture and put it in the jar. Then use your fist to push and pack it down tight so that no air pockets remain. Or use the little wooden pie tart pounder to do the same job. Its small size fits easily into the jar. You can also scrape the sides of the jar easily where the big pounders can't. They're just a few dollars, so if you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description below. Keep repeating until the jar is 3/4 full. As an option, you can add a clove of garlic to the jar. Now, garlic really comes out strong with fermentation, especially when sliced. Ideally, you want the garlic to add nice flavor and be a complement, not dominate and drown out all the other flavors, turning it into a garlic bomb. If you want to add the garlic option, cut 1 peeled clove in half. Add either 1 or both halves to each jar. That's it. Pour in the remaining juice from the mixing bowl, then press everything down one last time before we close this jar up. This is not required, but you can take a pH reading, and I'm going to share with you why I've started doing this with all my ferments. The bacteria needed for vegetable lactofermentation is called lactobacillus. When these good bacteria begin consuming the natural sugars in the food, their byproduct is lactic acid. Harmful microbes can't survive in an acidic environment below a pH of 4.5. This is why it's a good thing that the lactic acid produced by the good bacteria drop the pH below 4.5. A pH reading can be helpful to prove the fermentation. I like to use this digital pH meter over pH strips because I just love how precise and easy the reading is. Take a pH reading of the kraut brine just after packing it by simply sticking it in there. Remember, the cabbage has not yet fermented, so this is the pre-fermentation pH reading that we'll compare to later. We'll take another reading in 24 to 48 hours to make sure it's dropped below 4.5, proving the fermentation is healthy and on the right track. I'll show you how to do it later in this video. Next, take one of those saved cabbage leaves and tear it down to a better size. Place it inside the jar so it fits on top of the kraut nice and tight. It's going to help hold the kraut down beneath the brine. Tuck the edges of the leaf in against the glass. Wedge it in there nice and tight all the way around. If there's any stragglers, tuck them down. Everything should be submerged. Add on top of the leaf a fermenting weight. I like to use these glass fermenting weights, but if you don't have one of these, you can use a rock. I did this for years and still do on occasion. Now, if you go the rock route, scrub the rock with hot soapy water, then sterilize it in boiling water before its first use. After that, keep it as your fermenting weight for future uses. Simply just wash it with hot soapy water, no need to boil it each time. As for the glass fermenting weight, also wash it with hot soapy water before each use as to prevent introducing any bad bacteria by accident. Press whichever weight you're using atop the cabbage leaf. The weight does not need to be fully submerged, but everything beneath it should be. Here are a couple of lid options. If mold is a concern or a problem for you when it comes to fermenting, you can prevent it by using an airlock lid like this one. Since mold needs oxygen in order to grow, this lid, called the Easy Fermenter, removes oxygen from the jar with this little pump. Place the pump on the lid like so. Then pull the handle up to suck the air out. It's kind of like a bicycle pump in reverse. Repeat the pumping until it's really hard to pull up, which signifies there's no more air left to pull out. Any naturally formed gases from the fermentation will be able to escape by the special design of the lid, but no air will be able to re-enter. No special equipment? No problem. Place a coffee filter or paper towel over top the jar and secure it with the jar ring or a rubber band. Natural gases from the fermentation will be able to escape and debris is kept out, but this does allow air in, so as long as the cabbage is submerged beneath the brine, it's protected from any mold growth, since mold cannot grow in a salty, acidic, airless brine. Leave it on your countertop for 3 days. Now, this is where most fermenting videos will drop you off. But what do you do after this point? Let me take you farther down the road so you're not left hanging. A common question is, when is a ferment ready to eat? The quick answer is, when it tastes good to the person who's going to be eating it. With sauerkraut, the longer it ferments, the more sour it becomes, as well as other flavors developing. You can eat it as early as 3 days though. You don't have to wait weeks or months if you don't want to. To discover when it's perfect for your eating enjoyment, simply taste test it. If you're new to fermenting, you may wonder how you taste test it during the fermentation process. Let me show you. With clean hands, remove whatever type of lid you're using. Remove the fermenting weight and reach in and either pull back the cabbage leaf or pull it out completely. Dip a fork in to grab a bite. A brief encounter with a metal fork will not affect anything at all. It's okay. Now, fermenting for weeks to months in a metal container is different since the salt has a corrosive effect with long-term contact, but a 3-second touch with a fork is harmless. If it needs more time, in your opinion, put back the cabbage leaf, fermenting weight, and either coffee filter or airlock lid. If using the airlock lid, repump the airlock lid to once again remove the air. Then keep fermenting the sauerkraut on the countertop, taste testing it every so often. But if it's the perfect flavor and texture to your liking and you're ready to start eating it, place a regular lid on the jar and keep it in the fridge. It will last for months in the fridge, or a cold root cellar if you're lucky enough to have one of those. Since fermentation speeds vary from household to household, recipe to recipe, there isn't going to be one absolute for every situation. I've got a video that explains the various factors that affect ferment times. I'll leave a link in the description below for you. Now, regarding the follow-up pH reading, you'll follow similar instructions to that of the taste test. You can even do both at the same time. Dip the pH meter in. Here you can see the airflow kraut one dropped to a 4.2 pH. And the airlock lid one dropped to a 3.8. Both are very good readings below 4.5. We've got a healthy and safe ferment going on here. Now, if the pH hasn't dropped below 4.5 by day 3, then something's not right. Keep an eye on it, and if by day 4 it's still above 4.5, either put it in the fridge and eat it right away, or compost it and try again with some troubleshooting. So do you feel like your head is just going to explode with so much information? Have no worries. It may feel like a lot when you're new to fermenting, but as you get a couple of rounds under your belt, it will feel like old hat. You just gotta get in there and go for it. The worst thing that could happen is a botched jar of kraut that gets tossed. Big deal. Just try again. But most likely, if you follow this video's instructions, you're gonna have success with your very first jar. I've got a lot more fermenting information and recipes to share with you. Check out my complete fermenting playlist right here. Of course, all equipment, gadgets, and videos mentioned will have links provided in the description below. And you know, I too was once brand new to fermenting. Check out my story about my journey from city to country living right here. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye.